So today we're going to look at back to basics and hand wash, and we're hopefully going to answer a few frequently asked questions that delegates and students on courses will ask at various levels. Without effective hand hygiene, food safety will be compromised. It can lead to, or a lack of hand wash can lead to microbiological contamination, physical contamination if you've got bits on your hands and they're transferred onto the food, even different species of meats maybe, and allergenic contamination and certainly chemical contamination can occur. You need to wash your hands because, apart from anything else, the human gastrointestinal tract will contain over 1 kilo of bacteria. Most of those are natural bacteria that need to be there in order for you to digest your food, etc. But it's absolutely important that you do wash hands because there could well be some pathogenic bacteria in there as well. People may be carriers of food poisoning bacteria, again either in their guts or on their hands, and also the risk of cross-contamination as we discussed on the previous slide. Often we tend to try and teach and say that one way to wash hands is the way to do it and everything needs to be the same. In actual fact, really the actual amount of bacteria that's on your hands, the microflora on the hands, is linked to the nature of your work. And in good situations, this should affect the hand wash methods and the chemical used. So, for example, somebody who's maybe only handling wrapped food isn't going to need to wash their hands in the same way that somebody who has to work from perhaps raw food to cooked food, etc., and has to touch the two types of foods. And the things that will be affected would be soaps, the types of sanitisers you might use, how often, and also the method used. But one of the first questions, should we be using antimicrobiological soap all the time or should we just use plain soap? Well, there's been a number of studies and antimicrobial soap has actually been identified as being marginally more effective than plain soap. However, there are some drawbacks to this because constant use has been shown to result in a build-up of antimicrobial compounds on the hands. So you actually end up with something that's got a resistance there. And also, we do know that if you are going to use antimicrobial soap, it definitely works better when hands are heavily contaminated. There's very little difference between using a plain soap and an antibac soap if you've just got a small or normal amount of contamination. Therefore, again, the choice of soaps should certainly depend on the nature of the business and also on the product it handles. Next question. Soap or hand sanitisers, or even do we need hand sanitisers at all? Well, again, studies have shown that washing with mild soap and water for 20 seconds is usually more effective than applying a 70% hand sanitiser. So it's definitely better to wash your hands than it is to just use a hand sanitiser. However, if you've got heavy soiling or you want it as an additional area, or you've got some work where you haven't got any soap and water available for some reason, then alcohol-based sanitisers are very effective against gram-negative bacteria as well as gram-positive bacteria. And they're good on lightly soiled hands. So examples of gram-negative bacteria would be Campylobacter, E. coli and Salmonella, whereas non-alcohol-based sanitisers don't work very well against those bacteria. And another consideration to put into place is that where hand sanitisers are used, they most certainly need to be at least 60% alcohol, otherwise they tend not to be effective and you might as well really not use them at all. There is some evidence that non-alcohol-based sanitisers might not work very effectively on gram-negative bacteria, as we've already said. They may cause microbes to develop a resistance to them, and really they only reduce the bacteria as opposed to kill them outright. On top of which, they're much more likely to irritate skin than alcohol-based ones. So the message here is that if you are going to use alcohol-based sanitisers of any sort, you really need to make sure you're using alcohol-based ones because the cheaper non-alcohol-based ones tend not to work as well and may actually really harm workers' hands, which has its own problems when you've started to get flaking skin and sores, etc. Next question, nail brushes. Do we have to have a nail brush? Well, first of all, they're not banned, which is a common myth. A lot of people will say, oh no, they're illegal, or you're not allowed to use them, etc., etc. They're not banned under law. If they are used effectively, then they're likely to improve hand hygiene and remove the microflora on hands and under nails significantly. So we're not saying that everybody needs a nail brush, but for some jobs we do know that they're very effective to remove certain bacteria. They create more friction and they'll help to penetrate and remove biofilms which may build up under and around nails. And also, a good nail brush used in a high soil situation has been proven to be more effective than using an aggressive soap, remembering obviously that the soaps will eventually again lead to skin complaints, etc. If you do use a nail brush, and we'd advise it in places again where you're having to perhaps go from raw food to cooked food on a regular basis, or things like that where you've got a big build-up of bacteria on the hands potentially. Well, the bristles, when you do select a nail brush, the bristles need to be fused and not stapled, because otherwise you can't clean them properly. The bristles need to be of good quality, otherwise they all bend and they melt, etc. It's much better, in actual fact, to wash hands in the nail brush in a dishwasher than to stand them in a sanitising solution, because that will eventually become contaminated. Store the nail brushes up, bristles up once they've been used, and the bristles shouldn't be too stiff. In actual fact, it's been found that if you use a good quality nail brush and you rinse it under water and store it bristles up, the likelihood of contamination of that nail brush is negligible. So there's this myth that nail brushes are very dirty, and if you're using the right one, that in effect is actually not true. So for some circumstances, use of a nail brush is a really good thing. The next question, how hot does the water need to be? Do I have to have very, very hot water? And there's a common misconception that the hotter the better, because the idea is that you have it hot enough to kill the bacteria. Well, to kill most bacteria, you're going to be talking about 75 degrees. And if you had that on your hands, you'd have no skin left. You'd have scalded yourself seriously. So the answer is, the water needs to be comfortably hot. We know that some soaps are more effective in warm water, and we know that people are more likely to wash their hands thoroughly if the temperature is comfortable. So if it's too hot or too cold, the chances are people won't put their hands under the running water for long enough to wash them effectively. And the time taken to wash hands and the degree of friction generated is most certainly more important than the actual temperature of the water. So long as it's comfortable, then we would say that was an acceptable thing. And it's quite important to get it so that it's comfortable and encourage people to wash hands. Last, not quite last, but nearly the last question, does it matter how hands are actually washed? Well, there was an experiment that you can actually see if you look on BBC. It's on the Byte sites, and the link's at the bottom of this slide. They worked with Chorleywood to look at somebody who they deliberately contaminated hands in a solution, and then they got the person to not wash their hands at all and put the hands on a petri dish, and this led to very dense contamination. They then washed their hands very quickly and saw what happened then with soap and warm water, and what ended up was still a very large colony of bacteria all over the hands, so it was still heavily contaminated. The third way they did it was to thoroughly wash the hands but use no soap, and this had a lot less bacteria than a quick wash, but it was still quite heavily contaminated. And lastly, they washed the hands the way we'd expect people, thoroughly with soap, and took the time, dried properly, and actually we ended up with very few colonies there. It was just what you'd expect on a clean, healthy hand. Paper towels or air dryers. And again, lots of people have lots of ideas about this. Well, again, more studies, and a study that's been done in America has shown that drying with paper towels removes residual pathogens in two ways. First, by friction, so anything that's left will be removed by rubbing it physically off, and also then by wicking excess moisture onto the paper, so any bacteria that's in the moisture around the hands are also removed. So drying with paper towels works very effectively. Drying with a traditional air dryer does remove the moisture, so in the same way, and it'll remove some bacteria if you rub your hands under the actual air dryer, but it takes longer and it may spread bacteria because of the way the air is transmitted out of the actual machine. Nowadays we've also got the Airblade type dryers, and these don't disperse the bacteria. They use high velocity, they're quick, and yes, they seem to remove almost as many bacteria, certainly, as the paper towels. So again, it certainly depends on circumstances. Thought we'd finish just with an example method of how to wash your hands without a nail brush. Again, there's a number of different videos that you could have a look at that I found. One's a Camden one on camdenbri.co.uk, and the link's there. And also the FSA Scotland have a very good YouTube video which first of all shows hand wash being done in slow motion as they talk through it, and then quite quickly to show people about the length of time that they should actually be washing their hands for effective hand wash. Both of these work to basically the same idea though. You need to wet your hands under warm running water, apply enough soap to get a lather, rub all parts of the hands with soap and water, lather vigorously for at least 10 seconds, rubbing all hand surfaces, including the fingertips and thumbs, rinse thoroughly with running water, and then dry hands very thoroughly. And if you do this, then hopefully we're going to remove enough bacteria to make it safe to work. That's all I'm going to talk about today, but I thought maybe on another one we might, or one of the other presenters might look at the actual management of personal hygiene and hand wash, because I think we assume everybody knows how to wash their hands, we assume it's something that people do, but the reality is that it doesn't happen that often. And a study by the FSA in Wales actually showed that 53% of food handlers and 48% of managers couldn't actually demonstrate how to wash hands properly, which sort of leads to thinking that, yeah, we might think we're teaching people well, but we're obviously not getting there quite. And now we'll go on to some more discussion.